On the night of my wedding, I walked into the hotel suite expecting to start a new life with my wife. Instead, I stepped into silence. No kiss, no embrace, no warmth. She slipped into the bathroom, shut the door, and when she came out, she climbed into bed fully clothed, turned away from me, and said goodnight. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering if exhaustion had stolen what should have been the happiest night of our lives. But it didn't happen just that night. It didn't happen the next night, or the next week. For the first 5 weeks of our marriage, Allison refused any form of intimacy. Not once. No touch. No closeness. Nothing beyond the surface of polite conversation. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe stress, maybe nerves, maybe something she just needed time to work through. But the longer it went on, the clearer it became. This wasn't hesitation. This was a wall. Allison carried herself with a calm defiance, like she had planned this all along. She went about her day as if nothing was wrong. Breakfasts in silence, afternoons spent scrolling her phone, evenings lost in television. Whenever I reached for her hand or leaned in to kiss her, she stiffened, pulled away, or changed the subject. It wasn't rejection in anger. It was rejection in strategy, cold and deliberate. After 5 weeks of this, I finally asked. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, coffee cooling between us, and said I needed to understand what was happening. She looked at me without blinking and said, "It's my body. You don't get to demand anything from me." Then she stood, poured her coffee down the sink, and left the room like the conversation was already over. Her words didn't just sting. They froze something inside me. In that moment, I realized this wasn't about hesitation or stress. This was about control. She hadn't married me for partnership. She had married me to test how much silence I could endure, how far she could push before I broke. Most men would have fought back. Some would have begged, pleaded, shouted. I did none of that. I withdrew into silence, the same silence my father had taught me years before. He used to say, "A man doesn't need to raise his voice when he knows the truth is on his side." I thought of that every night as I lay alone in my own bed, Allison inches away but miles out of reach. On the 6th week, I filed a petition with the court to end the marriage. No fights, no ultimatums, no bargaining. Just paperwork. The clerk handed me back stamped copies, and I slid them into a folder labeled simply, "Proof." Allison thought she was the one setting the rules. She had no idea the quietest move I'd ever made was already in motion. After filing the petition, I moved through the house like a shadow. Allison thought I was retreating, that my silence was surrender. She had no idea it was the opposite. Every morning, I observed her patterns, and every evening, I took mental notes. The smallest details mattered. What time she woke, who she called, how her demeanor changed when she thought no one was watching. I didn't ask questions. I didn't confront her. I let her keep performing, unaware that her stage was collapsing beneath her feet. In public, she played the role of the radiant newlywed. She posted photos of us at restaurants, smiling as if we were inseparable. To friends, she gushed about married life, about how I spoiled her with comfort and security. Not a soul suspected that when the photos were taken, her hand in mine was stiff, her smile rehearsed, and the moment ended the second the camera flashed. She built an illusion for the world, but illusions can't withstand scrutiny. At home, I began building my case the same way I built my business, methodically, piece by piece. I kept records of her refusals, documenting the dates and the circumstances. Every time she pulled away, every time she reminded me that her body was hers alone, I logged it quietly. It wasn't bitterness driving me, it was precision. I knew that in court, emotions meant nothing. Evidence was everything. I also noticed something else. The phone she guarded so closely wasn't just a habit. She kept it face down on the counter, screen locked with a password I didn't know. At night, when she thought I was asleep, I could see the glow of messages reflected in the mirror as she typed furiously, her lips curled into faint smiles I hadn't seen directed at me in weeks. I didn't need to know who was on the other end. The secrecy itself was enough. My lawyer, Harris, told me I didn't need to prove infidelity to get out of the marriage. "You only need to prove intent," he said. "Show the court that this marriage was never entered in good faith, and you'll have your freedom." I nodded. I didn't tell him how far I was already ahead of that curve. The hardest part was restraint. Every instinct screamed to call her out, to demand answers, to force the truth into daylight. But I didn't. I let her believe she had me cornered with her coldness and her control. Silence was my weapon, and the longer I wielded it, the more she underestimated me. By the 5th week, when she repeated those same words, "It's my body, you don't get to demand anything from me," I didn't flinch. I simply noted the date, filed it in my mind, and moved forward. She thought she had ended the conversation. In reality, she had just handed me another brick for the wall I was building around her. What she didn't realize was that I had already chosen the battleground. And it wouldn't be in the bedroom. It would be in the courtroom. The first sign of escalation came not from me, but from Allison. One evening, she walked into the living room holding her phone tight in her hand, her expression calculated. She announced that she'd been talking with a friend who was a lawyer, and she knew her rights. She said that as my wife, she wasn't obligated to provide anything she didn't want to, and that if I tried to pressure her, she could take legal action against me. She didn't shout it. She said it like a warning, as if she had just pulled a card she thought would end the game. I didn't react. I let her words hang in the air, nodded once, and returned to the document I'd been reading. She grew frustrated, hovering in the doorway as if waiting for me to argue. When none came, she stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door. The silence that followed wasn't hers. It was mine, and it was heavier than any fight we could have had. That night, while she typed away on her phone in bed, I opened my laptop and began compiling a formal timeline. Not just dates and refusals, but her statements, word for word. "It's my body. You don't get to demand anything. I know my rights." Each phrase was a piece of evidence. Stripped of context, they looked like casual remarks. Placed in a timeline, they revealed a pattern, a refusal of intimacy not out of fear or hesitation, but as a strategy. My attorney Harris reviewed the file a week later. He didn't comment at first, just flipped through the pages, his finger tracing the lines. Finally, he looked at me and said, "This is stronger than I expected. If she thinks she can use the law to protect herself, she's forgotten the law can also expose intent." I told him I wasn't finished yet. Meanwhile, Allison grew bolder in her distance. She began spending weekends away, claiming she was with family, though I knew she wasn't. She returned with new clothes, new jewelry, things she couldn't account for in our shared budget. Again, I didn't confront her. I simply kept records, receipts she left on the counter, bank statements that didn't match her stories. All of it went into the same file, the same quiet archive of her unraveling. The more I stayed silent, the more reckless she became. She started telling her friends that she was the one in control, that I couldn't touch her, couldn't demand anything from her, couldn't even challenge her choices. Those words found their way back to me, carried by people who thought they were helping her case. In reality, they were handing me more ammunition than I could have asked for. By the end of the 3rd month, Allison believed she was untouchable. She carried herself with smug confidence, certain that silence meant defeat. What she didn't know was that silence was the very thing building the cage around her. And soon, the door would close. By the 4th month of marriage, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage where Allison performed her version of control, and I played the silent audience. She strutted through rooms with the confidence of someone who thought she had won before the battle even began. She mistook my calm for surrender. She didn't understand that silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. The documents I compiled grew thicker by the week. Every receipt she left behind, every unexplained withdrawal, every trip she couldn't account for, recorded, copied, filed. But it wasn't just about money. It was about intent. She had told me outright that I had no right to expect intimacy. She had reinforced it with her behavior, her refusals, her prideful remarks to others. Each detail was another brick in the wall I was building around her, and she didn't even notice. One evening, she returned home late, her smile too bright, her excuses too practiced. She carried a shopping bag from a store we had never visited together, something expensive. I didn't ask where she had been or who she was with. I simply watched her walk upstairs. Then later, when she left the receipt on the nightstand, I slipped it into my file. Silence doesn't just hide. Silence collects. My attorney Harris reviewed the growing folder with the precision of a surgeon. "She thinks this is about you demanding something from her," he said. "What she doesn't realize is that the evidence shows she never intended to honor the marriage at all. Courts don't look kindly on fraud." His words carried weight, but I already knew it. I had seen enough in business to recognize when someone overplayed their hand. Allison wasn't just overplaying. She was building her entire strategy on sand. Meanwhile, her public mask began to slip. Friends who once admired her confidence started noticing the cracks. She drank more at dinners, laughed too loudly, snapped when someone questioned her stories. A few even reached out to me quietly, hinting that they didn't understand what was happening, but that something felt wrong. I gave them nothing in return. No explanations, no defense. The less I spoke, the more Allison's behavior filled the silence on its own. By then, I had already prepared the petition to end the marriage, but I wasn't rushing it. Timing mattered. I wanted her so confident, so sure of her power, that when the truth hit, it would dismantle everything in one strike. Filing too soon would only give her a chance to regroup. Patience would make the fall devastating. At night, I lay awake beside her, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing as she slept. I thought about how easily she believed she had control, how blind she was to the fact that her own words and actions had already sealed her fate. She thought silence meant she was winning. What she didn't know was that silence was the sound of a trap tightening. And soon, there would be no way out. The cracks widened in ways Allison couldn't disguise anymore. She started slipping, making mistakes she didn't realize I was tracking. Her confidence turned to recklessness, and recklessness always leaves evidence. One Saturday morning, she told me she was visiting her mother. She left in a rush, barely making eye contact, her perfume heavy in the air. Hours later, I checked our joint account. A hotel charge appeared, not in her mother's town, but 2 cities away. I didn't call her. I didn't confront her when she returned that evening, clothes slightly disheveled, explanations half-formed. I sat across from her at dinner, nodded when she spoke, and let her believe her story was enough. That night, after she fell asleep, I printed the bank statement and filed it neatly into the folder. Another brick. Her lawyer must have noticed the weight shifting too. At the next consultation, Harris pointed out how Allison's financial trail contradicted her image as a dutiful wife. "This isn't just coldness," he said. "This is misrepresentation. If she's spending marital funds on things outside the marriage, the court will want answers." His tone was calm, but I caught the edge of certainty in his voice. He knew where this was heading. So did I. Meanwhile, Allison doubled down. She told friends I was controlling, that I was the one creating distance. Some believed her at first, but people watch and people talk. They noticed she was suddenly wearing jewelry I hadn't bought, driving to places she couldn't explain, flashing smiles that looked more like performances than happiness. Whispers started circulating, small at first, then louder. I didn't feed them. I let them grow on their own. Silence has a way of amplifying truth when lies begin to unravel. At home, the tension thickened. She tried to bait me into arguments, throwing sharp words across the kitchen or sighing loudly when I didn't respond. I never gave her what she wanted. I answered in silence, in steady routines she couldn't break. Every time she raised her voice, my quiet only reminded her how little control she actually had. The more she fought to keep her mask intact, the more transparent it became. And the more transparent it became, the easier it was to document. Receipts, transactions, timelines, her own words. Each piece locked into place with the others until the picture was undeniable. By the 5th month, I no longer wondered how this would end. The outcome was certain. She wasn't just undermining our marriage. She was undermining herself, in ways the court would see clearer than even I could. My role was simple. Keep watching, keep recording, keep silent. She thought she was tightening her grip. In truth, she was slipping further every day. And when she finally lost her hold completely, I would be standing there, silent, with proof that spoke louder than either of us ever could. The first court hearing came on a gray morning, the kind where the air itself felt heavy. I arrived early, binder in hand, every page in order, every piece of evidence prepared. Allison swept into the courtroom 20 minutes late, dressed like she was attending a gala instead of a legal proceeding. She flashed smiles at the gallery, as if charm could outweigh truth. I didn't look at her. My eyes stayed on the bench, steady, patient. Her attorney opened with confidence, painting me as a husband who had abandoned his wife emotionally, who had failed in his duties as a partner. He leaned into the narrative of control, framing Allison as a victim of my silence. I sat still, hands folded, letting every word pass without reaction. Harris beside me never interrupted, never objected. We knew the time would come to speak, but not yet. When it was Allison's turn, she delivered her story with dramatic flair. She told the court that intimacy was something no one had the right to demand, that she had been protecting herself from pressure. Her voice trembled at just the right moments. Her eyes glistened like she had rehearsed in front of a mirror. For a moment, I saw the judge lean back, considering her words. Allison thought she had him. She smirked in my direction, certain the performance was enough. Then Harris stood. He spoke quietly, evenly, without theatrics. He introduced the first exhibit, my documented timeline. Each date, each statement, each refusal, presented in order. He didn't embellish. He didn't argue. He simply read the facts into record. The silence in the courtroom deepened with every entry. Allison shifted in her seat, her smirk fading as the weight of her own words came back to haunt her. The judge glanced toward her, asked if she disputed the entries. She tried to laugh it off, saying they were taken out of context. Harris responded by sliding forward the receipts, the bank statements, the hotel charges. Piece by piece, he laid out the trail she had left behind. Not accusations, evidence. The judge's expression hardened. By the end of the hearing, Allison's attorney looked less like a fighter and more like a man realizing he'd walked his client into quicksand. The judge didn't issue a ruling that day, but he made one thing clear. The court would review every financial record, every inconsistency, every claim. And if fraud or misrepresentation surfaced, consequences would follow. Allison avoided my gaze as we left the courtroom. Her steps were hurried, her head low, a stark contrast to the woman who had walked in flashing smiles. I didn't speak to her. I didn't need to. The silence between us was heavier than words, and for the first time, I knew she could feel it too. That day wasn't the end. It was the beginning of her unraveling. And all I had to do was keep letting the truth echo louder than her performance ever could. The second hearing felt colder than the first, though the courtroom was the same. Allison walked in earlier this time, her posture stiff, her expression tighter. Gone was the easy smirk she'd carried before. She still dressed with care, but her eyes betrayed something new, caution. She had begun to sense the shift, though she wouldn't admit it. The judge opened with questions, his tone sharper than before. He asked Allison's attorney about the discrepancies in her sworn statements, about the hotel charges, about the spending patterns that didn't align with her narrative of a struggling, neglected wife. Her lawyer shuffled papers, coughed, and tried to spin explanations that sounded thin even to the gallery. Allison sat rigid beside him, her jaw clenched. When it was Harris's turn, he didn't raise his voice. He simply presented the next set of evidence. The receipts from her supposed family visits, the timeline showing she was in a different city altogether. He spoke like a man reading the weather report. Calm, factual, undeniable. The courtroom listened in silence. Allison's face flushed, but she said nothing. The judge turned to her directly, asked if she disputed the charges. She hesitated for a moment too long. Finally, she said she couldn't recall, that perhaps she had misremembered. The judge reminded her she was under oath, his voice edged with warning. That hesitation was all it took, the first visible crack in her armor. Afterward, Harris leaned toward me and said quietly, "She's unraveling. The silence is eating her alive." He was right. Every time she expected a fight, I gave her nothing. Every time she wanted me to explode, I sat still. That absence of reaction forced her to carry the weight of her lies alone. And under that weight, she was beginning to stumble. At home, the changes were even clearer. She stayed out longer, came back with excuses that sounded rehearsed. She avoided eye contact, her voice brittle when she spoke to me at all. I didn't follow her, didn't question her. I didn't need to. The court was already exposing her, piece by piece. My job was to let it happen. One night, I found her in the kitchen long after midnight, staring at her phone, her face pale. She didn't notice me watching from the hallway. She scrolled through messages, her fingers trembling, her breathing shallow. In that moment, I knew the silence had reached her. She wasn't just afraid of the evidence. She was afraid of what she couldn't predict, me. The quiet wasn't just my weapon anymore. It had become her prison, and the more she tried to fight against it, the tighter it closed around her. The judge hadn't ruled yet, but the outcome was already written. Allison just hadn't read it. The day of the third hearing felt different from the start. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with people curious to watch what had turned into a spectacle. Allison walked in with her attorney, her steps quick, her shoulders stiff. She didn't look at me this time. The smirk that once lived on her face was gone, replaced by a mask of forced composure. She sat down, clutching her folder like it held the answers she didn't have. The judge entered, his expression already telling the room that patience was thin. He went straight to the point. He asked Allison about the financial records, the hotel stays, the discrepancies between her sworn statements and the evidence presented. She opened her mouth to explain, but her lawyer spoke over her, stumbling through excuses about miscommunication and clerical errors. The judge didn't buy it. He reminded them both that perjury was a crime, and that the court wasn't interested in excuses, it was interested in truth. Harris rose slowly, calm as always, and handed the judge a slim packet. 2 pages. No thick binders this time, no mountain of receipts. Just 2 pages. He placed them on the bench and said only, "This will clarify everything." The judge read the first page, then the second. His lips twitched. Then, in front of a silent courtroom, he laughed. It wasn't cruel or mocking. It was the laugh of a man who had seen arrogance collapse under its own weight. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. Allison froze, her face draining of color. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably, eyes on the floor. The judge leaned back, still shaking his head, and said Allison's claims had no merit. Not only was she not entitled to what she demanded, but the evidence suggested she had entered the marriage under false pretenses. He announced that her petition for financial support was denied, and that the court would be reviewing her actions separately for potential fraud. The gallery erupted in whispers. Allison's hands trembled on the table. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I sat perfectly still, letting the weight of the judge's laughter settle over the room. Allison turned toward me for the first time that day, her eyes wide, searching for something. Pity, anger, maybe even recognition. I gave her nothing. When the session ended, the judge dismissed the room with a wave of his hand, still amused by what he had read. Harris packed his papers with quiet efficiency. Allison remained frozen in her chair, staring at the documents like they might change if she willed it hard enough. They didn't. They never would. The truth was undeniable, and it had crushed her louder than any argument I could have made. The silence had done its work. The fallout was immediate. By the time Allison walked out of that courtroom, her reputation had already started to crumble. Reporters waited in the hallway, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. Weeks earlier, she had courted them, feeding them stories about being a victim, about how cold and controlling I supposedly was. Now the questions were different. They weren't about sympathy. They were about lies, fraud, and the judge's laughter that everyone had heard with their own ears. She tried to push through the crowd, chin high, but her voice cracked when she told reporters she had been misunderstood. The cameras didn't miss it. Her attorney walked behind her, silent, avoiding eye contact, carrying files that had become meaningless. I walked past them without a word, not slowing, not acknowledging the chaos. Silence followed me like a shadow, and in that moment, it was louder than anything she could have said. In the days that followed, the whispers spread. Friends who once supported her now avoided her. Some of them called me quietly, apologizing for believing her stories. I told them nothing. I didn't gloat, didn't explain. I let them draw their own conclusions. And they did. Allison had built her case on arrogance, and now she had to live with the ruins. At home, the transformation was stark. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, speaking less, drinking more, her once bright confidence extinguished. The phone that had once been glued to her hand sat untouched on the counter. I didn't ask who had stopped answering her messages. I already knew. Silence had a way of cutting ties she thought were unbreakable. One evening, I came home to find her sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. She looked up when I entered, eyes searching for some flicker of recognition, some sign that I still saw her as the woman she pretended to be. I walked past her, set down my folder, and went upstairs. She didn't follow. The court's decision had been clear. The marriage was voided, the support denied, the fraud under review. She walked away with nothing but debt and a reputation scarred beyond repair. I walked away with everything intact, my assets, my father's legacy, and the knowledge that I had never raised my voice once. In town, I started hearing people use her name as a cautionary tale. Don't end up like Allison. It wasn't just gossip. It was a verdict handed down by society itself, harsher than anything the court could deliver. She had wanted control. What she ended with was exile. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to humiliate her. I only needed to keep quiet and let her own lies bury her. And they did. In the weeks after the final ruling, the silence in my life changed. It wasn't the silence of preparation anymore, or the silence of a house divided. It was the silence of freedom. Papers signed, records sealed, decisions made. The marriage was over, and so was the war Allison had tried to start. Harris called me one last time to confirm everything was finalized. He said Allison had no grounds left to appeal, no leverage to threaten, no claim she could make that would undo what the judge had decided. He asked if I wanted to pursue charges for fraud. I told him no. The court of law had already done enough, but the court of public opinion had done more. Allison wasn't just defeated, she was finished. He paused for a moment, then said quietly, "You did this without raising your voice once." I didn't answer. He already knew why. I returned to work, to the routines that had built my life long before Allison came into it. Deals to close, projects to manage, people who depended on me. Business moved forward as if nothing had happened, and in truth, that was the point. Allison had tried to make herself the center of my story. Now she was nothing more than a footnote. But every so often, her shadow appeared. I would pass her in town, head down, moving quickly past whispers she couldn't silence. The same people who once admired her now looked at her with pity or contempt. She avoided my eyes, but I could feel her searching for some acknowledgement, some proof that she still mattered. I gave her nothing. That was the final wound she never expected. Not anger, not hatred, not revenge. Just absence. One evening, I drove out to my father's land. The estate stretched wide and quiet, untouched by the storm that had tried to claim it. I walked the fields, remembering his words about silence, about patience, about strength that doesn't need to announce itself. Standing there, I realized he had been right all along. Noise fades. Silence endures. When people asked later how I had managed to win, how I had protected everything without a public battle, I never gave them details. I didn't talk about the binder of evidence, the timelines, or the 2-page document that made the judge laugh. I only said I stayed quiet. That was enough. Allison thought she had control because she spoke the loudest, because she played to an audience. But control doesn't come from noise. It comes from silence, from the ability to stand still while others destroy themselves with their own words. Some men fight with fire. Some fight with fury. I fought with silence. And silence won. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.